How can we dream outside of someone else's dream? I'm going to muse on ways that ritual practice can depart from this question. I think all of us here are very familiar with the notion of reality as these being made of myths and fictions that become lived out and normalized into reality. Thinking with the words of anti-colonial thinker Sylvia Wynter, we humans cannot pre-exist our cosmogonies, our origin myths, stories, narratives, any more than a bee at a purely biological level can pre-exist its beehive. But this also means, as she says, that human beings are magical, bios and logos, words made flesh, muscle and bone, animated by hope and desire, belief materialized in deeds which crystallize our actualities, and the maps of spring always have to be redrawn again in undared forms. So when we recognize this weird way of ordering, ideally we realize we can create our own narratives for better worlds. But often there's this disconnect between narratives we dream up and future-oriented pursuits and how we live them out in a very intimate level in the day-to-day. For instance, as we are working to build better worlds, the collective traumas that saturate our bodies do not simply fade in the mist of techno-fixed fantasies and utopias. So I've been exploring ritual as a conduit to take this magical cosmogonic play on narrative, let's call it poetic engineering, and address the emotional and psychological substrate underneath the layers of changing worlds. This is an exploration of rituals as emancipatory, but before I get into that, we also have to talk about how rituals need to be emancipatory from other rituals. We've seen ritual infrastructure maneuvered through capitalist power institutions of corruption, like the religious institutions of the Catholic Church, and capitalist finance in the stock market, in arbitrary value making, and ritual has been trending as a fetishized aesthetic, which makes it prone to being spectacle over substance. There's a popularization of witch influencers and whitewashed New Age rituals for self-growth that has become subsumed within new economies for commodified healing for the privileged. So it's important to acknowledge if these ritualistic modalities can be normalized and effective on such a global scale, causing discrimination, exploitation, ingenuity, extraction, what forms of ritual can counter these effects for the betterment of the earth and its inhabitants? So, demarcating from this, I'm specifically exploring a re-enchantment of ritual practices for healing our relationships with ourselves, our community, and our environment, ecology, and I speak about these interchangeably because they are inextricably intertwined. Healing the self is not in isolation because the body is an extended body, constantly extending into its environment, as Karen Barad would say, interacting, always in processes of exchanging, influencing, and working inseparably. So here's a little malleable infrastructure, just drawing from years of practice, and oops, too quick. Okay, let's go through this. Open container. We're gonna talk through these, this ritual infrastructure, and I guess I was talking too slowly, to look at how rituals can make transformation in art and shapeshift ostensible rigidities, and how each of these aspects have broader implications towards opening alternate constellations to relate and respond to the world. So, I'm rendering ritual as poetics, plasticity, and praxis to offer avenues to think with. Ritual can ride the meridian between poetics and praxis by correlating the imaginary realm with intimate practices in the day-to-day. And I'll expand on this in some examples relating to ecology further. And I think we can push this further by engaging ritual as a tool for playing with plasticity. Plasticity is defined by philosopher Catherine Malabou as the form-giving activity between the unconscious and conscious mind, the brain's capability to adapt and reform itself with the processes that shape our identity. So the reason I bring in Catherine Malabou here is because she does all this work explaining the emancipatory potentials of plasticity when our neurological programming is tentacularly penetrated by our social political climate. These processes can be really inspiring as a model for emancipatory implications. But her main argument is that we lack the consciousness of these processes. She says, the brain is a work and we do not know it, as in I can intellectually understand and know that I have plasticity and this ability to change behavioral patterns, but this is a different thing than being aware in the moment of how I am changing or reaffirming its shape. And this requires a very specific kind of consciousness. So a sculpting tool for playing with plasticity is habit, as habit is what helps nervous circuits to open new paths. But even habit loses consciousness. It becomes mechanical, we lose awareness of it, habit even becomes addiction. So this is where I situate ritual, akin to habit in this repetitive way as a tool for sculpting plasticity, but all the more powerful with this intentional attention. And so I would say that ritual creates the consciousness of change. Okay, now how are we on time? Daption, release. Oh, there's a lag. Release of old narratives, stagnant layers ask which side of history are you on, clearing space for new, composting for fertile soil. Forests familiarize with fire to sustain new life. Words become cinders, they eat themselves, and new life forms from forever transforming flames. To build new worlds, we need to free ourselves from old ones. This release includes the residue at very intimate levels of how we relate to a world. Memories are what we create our future with, so we can think of an adaptive release as a way to recalibrate our memories in order to open up possibility spaces. And the best way to expand on this is through examples of my personal practice. I'll talk about, I work with plants for healing, and I'll talk about a recent collaboration with Ignota Books for a project called Memory Garden. And this is a physical garden, healing garden, conceptually based on the art of memory, which was actually mentioned earlier, based on this system we create, hold, spatialize, and recall memory. So each plant was chosen by its healing properties and the way it's associated with memory, and they were all planted in the shape of a circle to follow a cyclical path of release and renewal along cycles of the moon. Plants for healing release correlated with the waning moon, and plants for creating new memories and renewal along with the waxing moon. And this is a way of sort of thinking about memory processes and how we can relate to them in these spatial ways. So part of my contribution to this project included sharing rituals to work with each of these plants at the different stages in the cycle. Communing with the healing properties of the plant would look like learning the medicinal properties and the metaphysical, symbolic aspects that signify a deeper connection, and then working with an intention for change that aligned with these healing processes at the different stages of memory. So one of the rituals for release, as an example, is yarrow. Yarrow's Latin name is Achillea, derived from the Greek hero Achilles, who was given yarrow and taught the gift, this art of healing, to heal wounded soldiers. While it's also been traditionally used for healing wounds as a poultice, where you chew it up and apply it to a wound to kind of like soak it up and help it heal. And medicinally, it moves stagnancy in the body, so inspiring like blood flow and helping the digestion through urinary tract, which we can also think as a type of healing release. So example of the ritual that I shared was to steep the leaves and drink the tea, and for this medicinal property of the release, while meditating on what is needed to be released in the body, and then taking the soaked plant and placing it somewhere where you can feel an intergenerational trauma stored in the body, a kind of a way of realizing like we hold traumas at different places in our bodies and bringing attention to this. And then at the end of this meditation of the release, placing the leaves down a moving body of water like a stream, and washing your hands in the water as an act of cleansing. So this is a symbolic act, and I'll get more into that, but the release clears space for the intention. Intention. Poetics prescribe meaning. You can tell words what to do. Shape-shifting the surface of skin, open exhales to the surface of air, the seed that grows from the compost. The word poesis comes from the Greek meaning to bring forth. So intentions can be poetic in bringing forth new narratives. Writing down intentions is a helpful practice, and when doing this, belief is important because our possibility space is shaped by what we believe to be possible. So we can think of how we can play with poetics, perhaps by transferring agency to an intention and trusting it as something that can exceed the thresholds of preconceived limitations by our own free will or what have you. Transferring belief or agency to an intention might be done through a symbolic act, a sort of mind trick. So correlating an intention with a signifier, which could be a symbol, mantra, plant, movement, visualization, etc., can help both enliven an intention and ingrain it into the unconscious mind, architecturally stretching presence to memory. So an example of one of the rituals in this memory garden, again, for creating new memories with the waxing moon, is with the flower cosmos. The name derives from the Greek word cosmos, which refers to the order and harmony of the universe. And cosmos is a self-seeding flower, symbolizing higher states of inspiration and clarity, corresponding with the element of air, supporting coherent writing, and medicinally, it's an antioxidant that is used to promote healthy bone formation. So working with these attributes, the ritual consisted of meditating on intentions for a new cosmology with the flower, and writing a story of a new world on a piece of paper with imagining that it already exists. So visualizing this inner universe and writing with conviction to bring forth narratives into a new future. And then in the ritual, when the writing was finished, picking the flower petals, blowing them east to hasten the wishes with the flight, rolling the paper around the stem of the remaining plant and setting it at the windowsill to look out into the world. It's magic that we can tell words what to do, but it takes a particular commitment to maintain intimacy with the narratives we dream up. So it can be helpful to find ways a ritual can correlate a poetic intention with a symbolic act or signifier that can remind you of how you want to be in the world when you forget all of the time. A sort of hack to establish catalytic channels from the internal landscape to the external landscape. So it's a new moon today, so let's all do an intention meditation together. If you feel comfortable, if everyone would just close your eyes, and let's do something like a collective intention. So place your hand on your heart and think of something you would like to bring into this community. And with your hand on your heart, feel like what is really needed, and then simplify this to its root. What is the root of this thing that is needed? What is it in its simplest form? And what does it feel like in your body? And then let's place both of our hands over our eyes and visualize this. So imagine what this world looks like when this intention is brought into place, when you can pull this into being. What are all the steps that it took to get here? How is it interacting in the world? How do you feel? What are the sights and sounds? How is this effective? And just really think about just all of the spatial interactions that are happening as this is brought into being. And now tap into your very most magical and intuitional thinking to associate which emoji best embodies this intention. What can be this talisman, this rune of emoji that could hold on to this intention for you, so every time you see it, you remember this is the way I want to interact in my community. And then when I close this, open your eyes. When I close when I close this talk, everyone put the emoji into the ritual channel in Discord, but no peeking at other people's emojis first. Do it, enter it before you. Look, Not now, though. I'm talking. Put your phone away. Okay, attention. Topology of presence. Listening is an absence and a presence. Receptive, giving awareness, receives awareness back. Love writes itself with all the senses. Sensuous space opens resonance to what can be. In a topology of presence, the ground holds your feet, like the sky kisses the ground to unravel horizons. In such an urgent time, can we slow down time? Capitalism has gone beyond labor and economics to dominating time itself, as we see the climate crisis rapidly unfolding amongst linear progressive time's killing arrow, as Ursula Le Guin would call it, and slow, careful practice of attention towards this atmosphere of interaction is required primarily in order to reconfigure the fabric we are enmeshed in. Practices of attentive presence help us to deeply listen so we can better know how to respond, which also aids in how we understand how a future is brought into being. And I've been exploring how ritual practices of divination accentuate this recalibration in our relation to time. So I'll give an example of a way to think about this with a recent project I did that compared dendromancy, or tree divination, with dendrochronology, or the science of dating by tree rings. Tree divination is an ancient tradition that spawned the Celtic language of trees, which is actually the first known written form of communication in the British Isles. And this language uses words of trees for communication. And through its semiotic connection in communing with trees of a landscape, it has been used in divinatory practices. As in, with participatory attentiveness with trees, symbolic meanings have been intuited and interpreted for guidance. So perhaps divination can be thought of as a practice of being so attentive and resonant to a more than human environment, as seeing the present so clearly that we can better access intuition that helps us understand how to bring a future into being. I knew that was going to happen. Sorry. And I compare this to dendrochronology, which is the science of dating tree rings, but it's also the opening up of age-old libraries of timestamps that have recalibrated what we know about environmental changes throughout history. This is because it's more accurate than radiocarbon dating. So stories hidden within the lines of trees have become a part of rewriting history in this chronological dance that is informing forecasting in climate science. So this type of relationship of reading trees unlocks an understanding of what conditions make certain futures possible and how in turn certain ecological futures might be brought into the present. Oops, I'm gonna pause this because I think I did mess up on the visuals, which I said that I think I did. So you can see how these intertwine. I just ignore this, pretend it's not there yet. You can see how these intertwine, and we can think of implications of this through what philosopher Federico Campagna calls prophetic culture. And what this is he describes how we're in this place in between worlds where we are in a world that can no longer exist, and we need to imagine how to bring in a new world. And this figure of the prophet is someone who can be in a multi-dimensional perspective to imagine different realities in order to save us from the ruins of an old world. And at the same time, thinking of worlding in the present as what we are leaving behind for future generations to come. So he says, I quote, "A prophetic approach to culture sees the possibility for a subject, through their activity of worlding, to escape from their captivity in pre-established frames of sense. To engage with prophetic culture is an exercise involving a subject's fundamental imagination about the stuff that makes up reality. It is an active work that it requires a modification of one's own cosmological parameters, but it also is an exercise of non-activity, where one observes the new reality that begins to surface in front of their own eyes. So rather than prophetic culture being seeing the future, it's seeing the present. The ability to observe and interpret the mesh of signs we are baking in order to gain intuition of how a future is brought into being. Worlding is a poetic plasticity of how we interact with time. And the next part of the ritual is extension, the body outside of itself, or integration. Fluidity erodes rigidities, where poetics meet praxis, seeping into the world like rivers stream into an ocean. Oh, yeah, I definitely did some glitching. Okay. Can we implement practices for how we want the world to exist by how we exist in the world? A big question I've been thinking with through this whole infrastructure I'm going through is how these modalities of healing rituals, embodied practices of adaptation, intention, and attention extend into cosmotechnics that are changing the future. Cosmotechnics is a term coined by philosopher Yuk Hui, which means the unification of cosmic order through technical activities. Here, cosmos does not refer to outer space, but on the contrary, to locality. Cosmologies are culturally embedded in daily life, in the ways we relate to other humans, non-humans, and the environment and technologies. Yuk Hui similarly argues that we need to bring an intuition into emerging cosmotechnics, as in the way that we sense, the way we localize in our environment, the way we are able to have intuition and embodiment and bring this into modalities that extend into areas like research methodologies and applied metrics in areas such as climate science or interspecies technologies. This is what the point was with this comparing dendrochronology and dendromancy, is how can we be more, like if we're doing climate science, how can we actually be connecting to nature at the same time? I think there's often a disconnect here. Close, memory of change. Ritual is the repetition of a practice that can play with plasticity, and this process-focused repetition is what can make it a continual catalyst of change. Ritual is not completed with an end goal, rather the solution is the process. Healing as a process, not a solution. When we are working with nonlinear healing and nonlinear worlding, this mode of repetition is essential. As we are collectively building worlds, the conventional notion of linear progress is very disheartening. When a goal is not achieved in a linear fashion after hard work, it can cause feelings of hopelessness and defeat. So we will always have to be going through these cycles of release and renewal again and again, and having the expectation for needing repetition can be a sort of reassurance. Knowing you can keep coming back to a holding place can be an aid in enduring in tumultuous landscapes, fleeting and full of hardships. Repetition like rolling waves, folding back into themselves, seeping into all the places where it is harder to hold onto intentions, remembering like the waxing moon reminds the waning, for collective dreaming in an ever-changing atmosphere. So perhaps ritual can create new memories, memories of change, by being the renewing process of change itself. And with that, let's close with some shared gratitude that we're able to be in community together and learn and grow and conversation and support and play through this. And so let's just take a big breath of gratitude. Inhale, exhale, and look forward to seeing your emojis. Okay, thank you.